Buck Scarsdale sat on the porch, drinking a cup of coffee. With him was his girlfriend, Joanna Fife, and her son, Bo. They talked idly, enjoying the cool evening air and the full moon. But soon a tragedy befell Buck. His coffee mug came up dry. Despite the time of evening, some habits were just too hard for an old police detective to break. Guzzling caffeine at the odd hours of the night was one of them. Buck excused himself and wandered off to the kitchen to fill his cup. He entered the dark room, reached out with a hand to flick on the lights, but stopped just before. He stood frozen in the dark, mesmerized by the 7 brilliant lights that sat outside the kitchen window. Quickly, he stole a glance at the stove clock, yet another detective habit. He left the kitchen and coffee behind and returned to the porch. When he arrived, both Joanna and Bo asked in unison what the strange lights were. Buck wasn't sure. He had some ideas. None of them good. The three stood on the porch and watched the lights for several minutes. They emitted an eerie blue glow, unlike anything the three had ever seen before. Buck would later estimate that the lights were about 500 feet away from them, and would describe them as, quote, BMW LED headlights, but amplified by 1,000. The lights were sure strange, but what really worried Buck was the fact that they never moved. They just seemed to hover 5 or 6 feet off the ground, perfectly still. Their lack of motion convinced Buck that they were the headlights of several parked trucks that had wandered onto his property, or floodlights attached to a large trailer. Best case scenario, it was some people who had gotten lost or needed help. Worst case, it was some scoundrels trying to steal his award-winning orchard trees. Either way, Buck wasn't the type of man to not help people in need, or to not defend his property. He, Joanna, and Bo climbed into his red pickup truck and set off towards the blue witch lights. The Scarsdales headed straight for the lights, their blue glow dominating the truck's windshield. That is until suddenly, all 7 of the lights disappeared. Strangely, neither of the trio could remember having seen them turn off. It just wasn't possible. They were driving straight towards them. If the lights had moved, dimmed, or hovered off, they would have seen it. One moment they were staring at them, and the next they were gone, as was the memory of their disappearance. The trio finally arrived at the area the lights had been, but found nothing. Now concerned and very much freaked out, Buck drove the truck to the ranch gate, but found it closed. There was only one way in and out of the ranch, and it stood in front of him, locked. The three quickly returned to the house, but the old sleuth in Buck was now fully reawakened. He had to know what those lights were. After about 20 minutes inside the house, he, Joanna, and Bo piled into the truck once more and returned to the orchard. This time the trio came armed with high-powered flashlights. They searched the area where the lights had been, looking for anything. Tire tracks, a trailer-shaped depression in the ground, holes where flashlight-topped tripods once stood. They searched for about 10 minutes when a loud click shattered the silence. The click wasn't mechanical or that of a snapping branch. Just like with the lights, the click was unlike anything the three had ever experienced before or since. It seemed to have originated nearby, but from what, they could not tell. A second click rang out, this one as loud as a gunshot from a patch of nearby bushes. Soon all three were on their knees, bending down and shining lights into the undergrowth. Suddenly a third gunshot click went off close behind them. They stood up. A fourth click, this time closer still. A fifth click erupted directly next to Buck that made every cell in their bodies scream. Now crazed with fright, the trio sprinted for the truck, all but dove into the cab and peeled off towards the farmhouse as fast as they could. The Scarsdales stood once again on the porch, gazing into the orchard. The unexplained lights and sharp, unnatural clicks having thoroughly disturbed them. They stayed like that for a while, standing shoulder to shoulder, staring at the place where just a few minutes before, the 7 lights once hovered. Inside the house, the phone rang. Buck picked it up on the second to last ring. It was his brother, Roger. "Hey Buck, I just got done with a business dinner, and I'm in your neck of the woods. Cool if I swing on by for a bit?" Buck could not say yes fast enough. He was just a retired police detective turned farmer. But Roger was a lawyer, a specialist in international law, and a die-hard skeptic. He was just what the 3 needed to make sense of the past half hour. By 10:30 p.m., Roger stood in the Scarsdales' living room while the 3 regaled him with their encounter with the ghost lights and the monstrous clicking. Roger listened patiently until they finished. He didn't believe them nor disbelieve them. He was sure what happened to them had really happened, but that it stemmed from a completely logical and mundane source. Roger wanted to see the crime scene for himself, and Buck agreed to take him. The 2 men quickly set off towards the orchard, flashlights in hand. They decided to forego the truck and instead walk the 500 feet or so to the orchard, thinking that they might find something on the way there. At around 11 p.m., the 2 brothers stood in the area where Buck, Joanna, and Bo had seen the lights and heard the clicks. Everything was normal now. No lights, no clicks. The 2 men were trading theories when suddenly the night sky overhead flashed blue and then a silver gray. Buck only caught it out of the corner of his eye, but Roger saw it all. Roger would later report to the AAWSAP boss team that the blue flash was caused by the sky ripping itself apart, and that the immediately following silver flash was caused by a long, thin object as it darted into the sky hole. Roger turned to his brother. "Let's get the fuck out of here." Buck wholeheartedly agreed. His detective training kicking in once again, Buck pulled out his cell phone to record the time of the event, only to find his freshly charged phone completely dead.
Accountability Office, and it's the investigative arm of Congress, but it's really working for us. And tonight, Lisa Sylvester takes a look inside the agency.
During the next 4 days, the Scarsdales reported feeling completely drained, dead tired, yet they had trouble sleeping, thanks to an intense and unending feeling of dread. Buck especially so. He found it impossible to sleep for more than a couple hours, and was so tired that even shaving had proven too much for him. He even started smoking again. It is interesting that Roger reported none of these symptoms, nor any odd ailments at all. If anything, he felt 10 years younger. On the night of July 10th, 2009, Buck was lying in bed, unable to sleep. A few minutes past midnight, he wandered down to the kitchen for a drink, when again, something out of the window caught his eye. The strange lights were back, but this time it was a single light, which hovered lazily off the ground in the pasture between the house and the orchard. Buck again quickly woke up Joanna and Bo, and soon the 3 were once again standing on the porch, watching the single point of unearthly blue light. They watched it for several minutes. Or was the light watching them? One of the Scarsdales later reported to the AAWSAP boss team that it seemed like there was a structure in the middle of the light that resembled a wall. Eventually, Buck decided he had had enough and set off the porch towards the light. But right as his foot touched the ground, the light disappeared. Buck phoned Roger about their newest sighting, and within 15 minutes, he had arrived on the property. the two brothers yet again left Joanna and Bo on the porch while they ventured out into the pasture, flashlights in hand. And again, as if events were repeating themselves, Buck and Roger arrived to find no evidence of anything mechanical, let alone physical, having been in the field. They began to discuss how the lights seemed to not emit any sound, when suddenly the strange blue light reignited itself, roughly 300 feet from the brothers. The orb appeared to be 5 feet in diameter. Roger described the light as being self-contained, not illuminating its surroundings and appearing to be lit from within. After about 5 minutes, the light died out. On the way back to the porch, the men noticed that Buck's 2 horses were going ballistic in their corral. Spooked into a frenzy, the horses railed against the corral walls. After calming the horses, Buck and Roger returned to Bo and Joanna, and when Buck asked, "You see the second light? It was within 300 feet of us." The mother and son could only reply with, "What second light? We didn't see a second light." Despite having a clear view of both the brothers and the location of where the second light should have been, Joanna and Bo saw only blackness. AAWSAP boss was alerted to the Scarsdale Ranch phenomenon after Buck reported the strange events to his local MUFON chapter. MUFON had agreed to keep its ear to the ground and to notify AAWSAP boss if any cases appeared that matched their criteria. After hearing the MUFON report of what the Scarsdales had experienced, an AAWSAP boss team was dispatched from Las Vegas, Nevada, to the Scarsdales Ranch in Logal, California. On July 13th, 2009, the team of 3 investigators had arrived on the Scarsdale property. The dispatch team set about sweeping the 20-acre property and conducted private interviews with each of the Scarsdales. They also staged several uneventful night watches. But by the 3rd day of nothing out of the ordinary, the AAWSAP boss team left the property and returned to Boss HQ in Las Vegas. The Scarsdales were relieved that their lives had returned to some semblance of normalcy after the terrifying events of the past week. Their general anxiety had started to wane, and they began sleeping and eating once again. Life, it seemed, had reverted back to its pre-blue light self. That is until the night of July 17th. At roughly 11:45 p.m., Buck Scarsdale was awoken out of a dead, dreamless sleep. But by what, he could not say. He simply laid there in bed, staring at the ceiling for several long seconds, before an unexplained feeling came over him. The sudden and intense compulsion to get out of bed and look out the window. He had the unshakable feeling that something was waiting for him outside. After several minutes, his will gave. He hopped out of bed, waltzed over to the window, and looked out, praying to God to see nothing. Instead, he saw 2 blue orbs hovering menacingly in the pasture. The strange compulsion fulfilled, Buck was once again in complete control of his body. He quickly retrieved his phone, a Motorola 1880, and dashed down the stairs to the porch, determined to record the phenomena, to have proof that he and the others were not crazy. He managed to record about 30 seconds of video before the lights blinked out. The usual flurry of phone calls followed, and within the hour, Buck was standing once again on the porch with Roger. The two examined the footage several times, and it quickly became clear to them that the lights were not 2 separate objects, but instead connected to what they likened to a, quote, craft that was thin and long with a bulbous middle. The blue lights were situated on each end of its saucer plate bottom, like wingtip lights on a plane. Roger suggested that they use Buck's truck to recreate the lights. Thinking that the footage could prove a useful reference, that could help rule out a terrestrial vehicle as the culprit. Roger drove the truck out to the spot where the twin lights had been in the pasture, while Buck recorded him from the porch with his cell phone. Roger parked the car facing the porch with its headlights on, and after about 15 minutes, the brothers met on the porch to review the footage. There was an obvious and quantifiable difference between the footage of the twin blue orbs and that of the truck. The brothers were startled to find that while Roger was sitting idly in the truck, 2 red orbs manifested themselves several feet above the vehicle. The red orbs moved in unison, as if attached by an object. But the thing that sent a chill down their spines was the oddly proportioned silhouette of a small humanoid that appeared in the truck's headlights. The figure had a head, 2 arms, a torso, and 2 unusually thin legs. During filming, Buck could not recall seeing the red lights or the silhouette with his naked eye. And Roger had not seen the humanoid, even though he should have had an excellent and fully illuminated view of anything standing in the pasture, let alone directly in front of the truck. The brothers' commotion had awoken Bo and Joanna, who joined the two in obsessively playing back the footage until 5 in the morning. Before finally retiring to bed, Joanna locked the footage on Buck's phone so that it could not be deleted, and made sure to plug it into the charger. When the Scarsdales finally awoke later that afternoon, they discovered that not only had the footage of the previous night been deleted, but that nearly everything else on Buck's phone had been as well. All of the photos, all of the videos, gone. The only thing that was left on the device, strangely, was Buck's contact list. Following the hair-raising events of July 17th, a second AAWSAP boss team was sent to the Scarsdales' property in Laurel, California. The team conducted night watches on the Scarsdales' ranch, and in stark contrast to the prior team, they experienced a great deal of unexplained phenomena. They witnessed flying orbs of light that hovered in ever-changing geometric patterns. They saw a long, thin black craft that would hover over the pasture for several minutes at a time. In a most striking similarity to the Axelrod survey team encounter that was detailed in the prior video, the set of orbs and craft the second AAWSAP team saw were only visible through night vision, not the naked eye. Some of the bizarre events that were recorded over the team's 4-day-long investigation include the inexplicable changing of a Sony SR10 camcorder, which had been set up initially on a tripod and set to video record mode, was mysteriously found toggled to demonstration mode, a task that would require physically manipulating buttons and a switch on the camera itself to achieve, all while an AAWSAP investigator sat within 30 feet of the camera the entire night. When the camera was investigated for signs of what could have caused the switch, investigators found that the camera had somehow taken pictures of several UFOs and orbs, despite being set initially to video record mode and then found in the useless demonstration mode. Another shared oddity between the Scarsdale encounters and the phenomenon often recorded on AAWSAP's very own Skinwalker Ranch was the sudden drainage of fully charged batteries. The investigators and Scarsdales reported that everything from mundane cell phones all the way to the AAWSAP team's rugged, dependable, and extremely expensive Aranea Spectron handheld spectrum analyzer experienced unexplained errors and had their fully charged batteries die within minutes. The AAWSAP report also makes frustratingly vague mention of images that one of the Sony camcorders took that depict, quote, contrails and the images of faces. And finally, the Scarsdales reported poltergeist activity in their home. Late at night, while everyone was in their beds, the family would lay awake and listen to the sounds of doors opening and closing by themselves, the sound of someone searching the fridge or stomping up the stairs. The family witnessed intense and unexplained flashes of light that seemingly happened to them at random, even while inside the house. The Scarsdales attested to never experiencing any paranormal activity within their home. That is, until after their encounter with the blue orbs and terrifying clicks on the night of July 5th. Needless to say, the strange orbs and haunting-like activity the Scarsdales experienced have great similarity to the phenomenon often experienced on Skinwalker Ranch, and those who suffer from its dreaded hitchhiker effect. But there is one more interesting thread that further ties what took place on the Scarsdales' quiet orchard in California to AAWSAP's infamous cattle ranch in Utah. But to properly explain that connection, I'm going to have to first give you a painfully brief and possibly more than slightly inaccurate summarization of another decades-long top-secret government program that also dealt with the supernatural. During the Cold War, the USA and USSR were constantly looking for a way to gain an advantage over the other. This famously led to the space race and the advancements in the hard sciences that came with it. But the intense desire to gain any and all advantage over the other led the two superpowers to conduct research into more paranormal avenues. One such project that was housed by the CIA from 1978 to about 1995 was named Project Stargate. Now, Project Stargate was both its own project and also an umbrella term that was used to refer to several different projects that shared a similar line of research: remote viewing. Remote viewing is the act of projecting one's consciousness out of body and over great distances, with at least one of the five senses intact, usually sight. The project would ultimately conclude that remote viewing was possible, but with a great difference in quality. One subject could remote view a target site, give accurate details of the layout of the building, and in some cases suss out information of the general purpose of the site, and give accurate physical descriptions of its human workers. And on other occasions, the same subject would scry the same or nearby target site and come away with nothing but, quote, static. Project Stargate, along with all of its offshoots, were eventually shelved in the 90s, with the CIA claiming it was a giant waste of taxpayer money and time, since a lot of the intel gleaned from remote viewing, while mostly accurate, was almost always too vague or cryptic to be actionable. For example, when remote viewing a freshly built Russian naval yard on the coast of the Black Sea, the subject reported that men at the naval yard were operating under the utmost secrecy. When pressed by the researcher for further details, the subject could only repeat one word: Akula, Akula, Akula. The session was deemed yet another failure. That is, until after the end of the Cold War and the fall of the USSR, when that top secret installation on the Black Sea was revealed to have been constructing the Soviets' then newest nuclear submarine, codenamed Shark. And the word for shark in Russian is Akula. Famed researcher Hal Puthoff was involved in both AAWSAP and several of the Stargate programs. The line of thinking at the time was that if the research team proved incapable of documenting and recording the paranormal activity that plagued Skinwalker Ranch, then maybe cameras and spectrometers were ill-equipped for the job. Maybe the paranormal needed a paranormal method of observation, and so authorization was given from AAWSAP's parent organization, the DIA, to perform a remote viewing test of the property. The room was barren. almost clinical. LED lights casted unnatural white light onto the white walls, the white tile floor. One of the few things in the room that was not white was the polished metal desk that was surrounded by 3 chairs. It was here where Joseph McMongle sat, staring at the textureless ceiling. He'd been summoned by the powers that be to remote view a target. Joseph's skills were well known and renowned in the field of remote viewing. By necessity, he was always kept in the dark about the target. In some cases, he was debriefed after the fact, but that was rare when the job was for the government or military. The door to his right opened, and a man he had never seen before stepped in. "Hello, Joseph, right?" "That's me." "How are you today?" "I'm fine, I guess." Good, mused the doctor. "Are you aware of how this works? You give me an envelope with a target, I view it, and describe what I see." "That's right," said the doctor, pulling a tape recorder from his coat pocket. "And the letter?" "I can touch it, but I can't open it," answered Joseph. "Exactly," replied the doctor as he set up the voice recorder. Once the device was set into position and tested, the doctor took a seat across from Joseph. "Ready?" Joseph nodded yes. "All right, Joseph, here's the target." He handed Joseph a sealed envelope. The letter contained no place names, but rather a string of numbers, the longitude and latitude coordinates of the target. Joseph took the letter in his hands and closed his eyes. After about a minute, he spoke. I see what looks to be a ranch or a farm." The doctor remained silent. It was best to ask Joseph as few questions as possible, as to not influence his answers. "There is a ridge of some sort to the north, with a stream running along its bottom. I see buildings. There's a bunch of them in clusters. Some of them look abandoned." "Can you draw them for me?" asked the doctor. I think so," replied Joseph. The doctor slid a sheet of paper and a pen across the table. Joseph began to draw. When the sketch was compared to an aerial photo of Skinwalker Ranch, it proved to be a near identical match. Joseph also gave a highly accurate account of the types of plant and animal life found on the ranch. He also gave detailed physical descriptions of the ranch's 2 security guards and the 2 ranch caretakers, Mr. and Mrs. Dietz. These 4 people were indeed the only ones present on the ranch at the time of the remote view. So it came as quite the surprise when Joseph started to describe an unknown 5th person. According to Joseph, the 5th entity was small, roughly 60 to 70 pounds in weight, stood at around 4'3", was male, and also had no hair. Joseph struggled to see other physical traits, a sharp contrast to the high detail descriptions he gave about the ranch's 4 other occupants. Joseph claimed that the 5th was invisible to the others, and that it sometimes attempted communication with them to see how the other 4 would respond. Joseph finished by saying the communication was never clear, and that the ranch personnel would perceive the communication as coming from above and behind their head. Whatever weirdness that had moved itself onto the Scarsdale's property was extremely similar to that of AAWSAP's very own Skinwalker Ranch. But the ranch's history of strangeness goes back decades, while the Scarsdales was completely normal for years prior to their first encounter with the blue lights on the night of July 5th. And so the question begs to be asked, why? A clue might lie with the small entity that was captured on the Scarsdale's truck recording. The humanoid silhouette, with its large head and thin limbs, bears a striking similarity to the unknown 5th person Joseph McMongle described during his remote viewing session. Interestingly, one of the few repeat oddities reported on Skinwalker Ranch is the sudden and loud onset of talking or chanting in an unknown language that seems to emanate from above and behind the experiencer, no matter what direction they turn. I, like many others who have immersed themselves in the stories of the unknown, and of Skinwalker Ranch in particular, have speculated that the paranormal events witnesses have experienced might be some form of interdimensional communication. Would it not be amusing if on some other plane of reality there are big-headed and small-limbed interdimensional scientists with their very own paranormal ranch? Say one of these interdimensional scientists was to accidentally spill his coffee on the floor of their interdimensional ranch house HQ, and the result was not only a spill in their dimension, but the sudden and unexplained appearance of a dark stain on the floor of the Skinwalker Ranch house in our own. What if when earthly human scientists shine high-powered lasers about their ranch, it causes ghostly and unknown UFOs to appear in our interdimensional neighbors? What if when an AAWSAP security guard stands in a field one pleasant summer night in Utah while overseeing an experiment, his silhouette is captured on film by an interdimensional scientist, recording the sudden outbreak of orbs in his pasture? Every culture on Earth has sacred or forbidden places, where it is said that the veil between worlds is thin. What if sometimes you can catch a glimpse of the other side? What if something looks back? There has been many theories as to what paranormal events truly are. Everything from swamp gas to time travelers. Its temperament seemingly two-faced. A single contact with the phenomena can make a lifelong alcoholic suddenly turn sober, or make cancers bloom in your cells. It can drag you kicking and screaming out of your bed in the middle of the night and onto a metallic ship. Or it can find you half dead in the woods and nurse you back to health. We might never know what the phenomenon truly is, but maybe that's its purpose, to stay on the periphery of human awareness and observation, always there, yet always just out of reach, in order to keep the fire of superstition and the awe of the unknown alive as we humans sprint down our evolutionary path, so that no matter how advanced we become, we always have something to stare at and wonder. Just like the Scarsdales did from their porch the night the lights appeared in their orchard.